Boxing in the Washington, D.C. area is experiencing a real resurgence. When we think about pro boxing, we typically think about Las Vegas and Atlantic City. But one day soon, we may be mentioning Washington, D.C. in the same sentence. I'm Charles Sutton, sports writer and correspondent for the Washington Informer. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of the Washington Informer News, the resurgence of boxing in D.C. I had the opportunity to sit down with three major players in the boxing industry as they give us their perspective on the sport that's gaining significant momentum here in the district. Welcome. I'd like to introduce you all to Eric Moses, Senior Vice President, Events DC.
Thanks for having me, Charles. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. I want to talk to you about the resurgence of boxing in the nation's capital.
Absolutely.
When you look at the prize fighting landscape in America, it seems to me that cities like Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and New York dominate the scene. What must DC do to become one of those players?
Well, I think, DC has a rich history in boxing, and I think most people recognize its heyday in the kind of 80s and 90s with Sugar Ray Leonard and Too Sharp and some of the other Shamba Mitchell and those guys who were champions all around the same time coming from this area. I think what we are fortunate to have now, as you mentioned, was Lamont Peterson and all of the fighters that are coming now through the Headbangers training group that are going to give us a little more visibility on boxing in Washington. At the end of the day, boxing is like any other sport or event. People have to vote with their feet, and that means when we have boxing events in the city, people have to show up. They have to buy tickets. They have to talk about it. They have to promote them, on grassroots, in the gyms, in the barbershops and other places, so that people know that boxing is back in Washington and back in a big way.
The decision between Pacquiao and Bradley, where all the fans thought that Pacquiao was clearly the winner, but Bradley got the decision, does that somehow damage the reputation of boxing?
I think that does in certain people's minds, but I think at the end of the day, the number of good fights outweighs the number of bad fights or controversial fights. The one thing that I will say, and I'm sure you would agree with, is that, in some ways all press is good press. So if people are talking about controversial fights, they're talking about boxing. And that's a good thing overall for the sport. I think that we've got some great champions right now, and Floyd being one of them. There have been some fantastic fights. I mean, the Pacquiao-Marquez fight was a huge fight, and it was a really good fight. There are a lot of good fights that are going on that aren't even at the championship level, and I think that will start to get people to talk more and more about it, and that will far and away outweigh the negative feelings associated with some of those more controversial decisions.
Is Events DC a major player in the resurgence of boxing?
Well, primarily we're a host venue. We were fortunate to host the Peterson-Khan fight back in December of 2011 at the Convention Center, and that was a sellout fight, and we were happy to see the enthusiasm here in Washington and in the DMV more broadly for people to come out for that fight. But we're looking to host more fights in the DC Armory, which people who are from the district are familiar with that venue, are familiar with boxing in that venue, and we're hoping with some of the local stakeholders, with Headbangers in particular, that we'll be able to host more fights going on there as well.
Barry Hunter, director of Headbangers Gym, has a unique perspective on the resurgence of boxing, Lamont Peterson, and what DC was like during its boxing heyday.
I grew up right there on 8th and H by the Cocoa Club.
In Northeast.
Northeast. And one of the legendary left hookers in the business was Bobby Foster. And Bobby Foster, of course, used to be the bouncer at the Cocoa Club. And we were maybe a couple of blocks away from Mr. Finley's gym, which all these guys just come through, legendary fighters come through the gym and train. Back then, if you go back to the footage back then, a boxing match, it'd be like a sellout. Every time you flip the TV on or you see a poster or pictures or news clippings of it. I think the boxing back then, the people that controlled boxing, the people that ran boxing, the people that fed boxing, had a lot more passion and love for the sport then, and as opposed to now. You would go to the fights, man, and the fights was like no other. This was like no other. Some of the names that I mentioned to you, you had, a fight like Ali Frazier, Larry Holmes, Ernie Shavers. These were big fights, man. And everybody came out to see these fights. The teaching today, as opposed to back then, is different. You were actually taught to be a fighter. You were taught the skills of boxing. Now you have people coming in just seeing maybe dollar signs and want the fast route to a world title. So you have lack of passion, you have lack of love, you have lack of concern for your athlete.
What do you attribute to the downfall of boxing?
I mentioned lack of passion, lack of concern for the athlete, lack of love for the sport and the athlete, and money, greed. And that may be the biggest key of all. Because, I'm watching fights where you may have an athlete with maybe 100 to 200 amateur fights, some even 300 amateur fights. So the experience is there. As opposed to putting them in a ring with a person that's 0-10 or 1-10, he's totally outmatched, overmatched. You have to have some type of health concerns, because if you 0-10 or 1-10 or 2-10, and you've been knocked out maybe 6 or 7 times out of that 10, what type of, what kind of resistance can you really give me?
Yeah.
Or give my athlete? To me, that stinks. I like to see a little bit more even playing field. When you go to the fight as a fan, you spend your money for cable, or you spend your money for a boxing ticket, you want to be entertained. We're entertainers, and that's what it should be. And I think that's some of the things that actually turn people off the sport of boxing and had them look for alternatives. I'm one.
Okay. Barry, you and Lamont Peterson have a very unique relationship. What can you share with us about it?
Lamont was brought to me by Patrick Harris, which was his brother-in-law. He had just came out of the shelter, and foster care, I believe it was. And he used to tell me about Lamont all the time. And just so happened one weekend we were going to a fight. I was taking, his brother-in-law was actually fighting them. And I was taking him to a fight, and we were crossing somewhere in Northeast, and he saw them outside playing, the little kids, like 9 at the time. And he told Lamont to throw some punches for me, and he's real shy, he didn't make no moves. Anthony, he jumped right in, he started punching. And I told him I would bring him up to the gym, but the brother-in-law ended up bringing him. And the first day, with him, his focus wasn't that of a regular kid that age. And you can show him something once, and the second time he almost put it to perfection. So I knew it was something unusual about him. And the rest is history, man. He went from, having no history in the game to, winning, the little junior tournaments, to winning the open class tournament. And then he became a member of the U.S. national team. And from there, Olympic trials and all the way up to the World Championship. And then he won the World Championship. He went twice to the World Championship, second time he got it down.
And what's the status of Lamont Peterson's career right now?
Lamont Peterson will be defending his title versus Kendall Holt February 22nd in the nation's capital. Thus far, it should be at the D.C. Armory. We were supposed to have fought Zab Judah, but Zab took another path, and I wish him well. Zab's like family. It felt kind of awkward getting ready to fight Zab in the first place, but nevertheless, it was what it was. Timothy Bradley, I have gotten a call from Bob Arum about Lamont fighting Timothy Bradley. This went on a couple of times, and Timmy, he don't know what he wants to do right now, so Kendall was the mandatory. And so he's next up in line, and again, most of these kids we got relationship with, we know them from the amateurs. And, it's kind of awkward going in the ring to face them, but it's the business we're in. If I had my choice, it would be either Marquez or, Pacquiao, any of those guys at a high weight class.
Promoting a fight is a crucial element of the pro boxing game. One man that is instrumental in reviving the pulse of pro boxing in D.C. is none other than Andre Johnson.
I am the official publicist for Headbangers Promotions. I'm also a part of the promotion team, and that team consists of myself, Cologne Hunter.
That's the wife.
That's the wife, and she is the head promoter. Barry Hunter, and also Lamont and Anthony Peterson have a stake in Headbangers Promotions as well.
Andre, what can be done at the grassroots level to promote boxing in the city?
I think it's very simple. I think it's the building that support base, supporting the amateur program, supporting the professional program, even at the lower level. When people like a Dusty Harrison, who's just starting out, who's had 9 to 10 fights, being there for a guy like that that continues the process and puts us in position to continue to be competitive with a Vegas or Atlantic City to go after big name fights.
Andre, what's the status of Lamont Peterson's boxing career?
I think it's back on track. I think, one thing about Lamont Peterson, he is separate from so many. I mean, he's a different kind of person. He's not impressed by flashy things, and he's what they would call a gym rat. He's somebody who will be in this gym boxing if he was fighting for a world champion, or world championship, or if he was fighting for nothing. He loves to box. He loves the sport. He accepts the things that come with it. But if he could box for the rest of his life, that's all he would do, and not get any rewards. It wouldn't matter to him. Just the opportunity to be in the ring is what's important to him.
Would it be fair to say that promoters play a major role in the resurgence of boxing?
Without a doubt. It's just like it's like show business. It's putting on a show, putting on a production. So being a promoter, I mean, that's your task. Your task with putting together the show to attract people. DC is a booming town. There's so many eateries, there's so many bars and restaurants and places to go and things to do outside of the actual event. And that's what makes Vegas and Atlantic City so attractive. And we're on their heels right now. Politics, government, great food, great entertainment, great nightlife, great lifestyle.
On December 10th, 2011, more than 8,000 boxing fans packed into the Walter E. Washington Convention Center to witness Lamont Peterson's 12-round split decision championship win over Amir Khan. This dramatically successful night proved that Washington, D.C. is indeed a boxing town. Peterson, a D.C. native, had just won the unified super lightweight world championship in front of his home crowd. The fight was televised internationally on HBO in the United States and Sky Sports in the United Kingdom. Right now, Washington, D.C. is part of a worldwide boxing conversation. The nation's capital has a champion in Lamont Peterson and several other fighters, such as Seth Mitchell and Anthony Peterson, that are positioning themselves to replicate Lamont Peterson's success. Lamont Peterson is the 14th D.C. area boxer to win a world title since 1990. So get ready, boxing fans. Washington, D.C. is about to join Las Vegas and Atlantic City and become a major player in the world boxing landscape. I'm Charles Sutton. Thank you again for joining us in this special edition of the Washington Informer News, the resurgence of boxing in D.C.